what's the importance of having a consistent gig like that as a musician? So I'm in Atlanta, and obviously Atlanta is not as proficient as New York, but there are people who have these consistent gigs where it's like they run a jam or something like that on a Monday or Tuesday usually when everyone else is not gigging, right? And one of the things I see about those players that go to those jams is they very quickly become monster players because they just have a consistent gig like every week. And so for you and your experience, what is the importance of having that consistent gig every Monday for, 17 years?
I think I would not have a solo career if I wouldn't have that gig, because I can't really. There's different ways now. The world has changed, but I can't really see a way to develop original music and your voice unless you're playing live, and be able to do it once a week. It's so consistent that it really lets you, you know. For me, it's like a lab. I would just try stuff, but I would also perform for people and play with musicians that I like, that hopefully will kick my ass. You know what I mean? I don't see how I would be able to make any records if I didn't have that gig. Like literally, I probably wouldn't have a solo career.
So the thing I think about this is kind of a parallel, and one of the things that's kind of become a theme on this podcast is the importance of that consistent gig. And while it hasn't necessarily been something exactly like this, one of the other parallels that a lot of musicians that have been on this podcast have brought up has been playing in church every Sunday. So it's just like a similar gig. Now, one of the differences between what I believe you're doing at the bitter end versus like a church gig is that you're the leader of it, right? And you're kind of developing more music, whereas, a church gig is, how great is our God for, however long, whatever, right? My question is, how, as a leader of a gig like that, how do you keep it fun and interesting? And how do you make it a fun place for musicians to hang out? And also, how do you make it interesting so that the audience comes back and enjoys it and has a good hang?
Okay, well, the audience thing is a separate thing that we can discuss. I'll answer the first part. The part with making it interesting is I only think about what music I'm gonna play and what musicians I'm gonna use when I do those gigs. So to me, every week is like some kind of an experiment or developed of something, you know. And I wrote a lot of original music during that time. So to me, it's almost like I had this agenda, you know. Okay, I'm making a new record next year. I have to write 10 tunes. So I was working on writing the tunes and bringing them to the bandstand or the bitter end, and bringing them to the band to play. So to me, every week was like um, some kind of like inspired experience of some sort. You know what I mean? I don't think I've ever done a gig when I was like, oh, let me just do this and go home. It was never. It's always that you're always trying to work on your tone, on your on your expression, on the music that you play. Of course, there were gigs that I played the same music for like a bunch of times, but that's still okay. Um, and hopefully it came across to the other musicians, because people played with me there and still are. You know what I mean? So people are interested in playing and making music, and
And
that
not
room.
just and not just like musicians, but like world caliber players are playing with you there.
Yeah, but those are the guys that I've been. I'm lucky enough to play with those guys all the time. So, and I have, the thing is, I live in New York and I have access to those guys in New York. When I tour, a lot of times I'll tour with guys that are not from New York. But even those guys, sometimes they come to New York and we play there, or So it's like the it could have been any room that will give you the opportunity. It's just that I got really lucky where the bitter end is a really good room to play, because it's not big, but it's also not small. So I can bring a Marshall and crank it and play there. It's rare. Most places, you play in a hall or you play in a small club. You have to bring a little deluxe or something. That was a room. It still is, that I can bring a Turok, I can bring a Marshall, I can bring two amps playing stereo. I can fuck around, do whatever I want, and try stuff, which I still do till this day. So it's kind of a rare situation. I want to mention one other thing. The only other place that was kind of equivalent to that, it was smaller, but it had that same kind of vibe and idea, was the 55 bar that actually ended up closing. And the 55 bar was where Mike Stern used to play twice a week when he was in town, where Wayne Krantz used to play every Thursday. Um, there was a couple other people that had steady gigs there. So there was kind of the equivalent of the bitter end. The only difference it was that the 55 was much smaller. You can still dig in and play, but it was a smaller room, and it held like half of the people at the bitter end. Yeah, so that's like I don't know. I just got lucky with that. You know what I mean? And people. So here's the thing about people showing up. Things have really changed drastically. I would say since maybe YouTube started to become big. Like I can't say the exact year when it started, but you kind of notice before the pandemic, a few years before the pandemic, that there's like less and less. Like if people would show up if something is special, you know, but there was a lot less attendance, and it was a lot harder to bring people to gigs. Where when I started to play in New York, I'm talking about when I started to do my steady Monday night in New York. It started in 2001 and it ended sometime in 2019. Maybe it started 2002. 2002 it started, sorry. We used to play on a Monday night, which is normally a completely dead night, at least today. We used to play on a Monday night at 10:30, which was never 10:30. It was always later. And we had many, many, many nights where it was packed with people. People were hanging late. It was a whole scene. Now it doesn't happen. It's the culture kind of changed, you know, which is a bummer. And that's something that's a challenge now, you know. Um, it was kind of a similar thing. Well, 55 bar was a little different, but it was a similar thing. Like if you Monday nights now are really hard nights to play, but at the time, I would say that for about 15 years or something like that, it was, people would show up, and I think the culture has changed, and now it's like less of something, and there's less people that just like it's harder to grab people to show up regularly, you know?
Now, if somebody wanted to start a gig like that, like a consistent, like we'll call it a quote unquote residency, right? How would you approach a venue like that? Like if you were to approach somebody now?
I never approached them to say, hey, I want to play every week. Again, the way it started is I started to play once a month. And then after a while, I had kind of a relationship with them. And then I did this live album. So when I did the live album, I think I played maybe twice a month for a couple of weeks. And I think after that, I don't know, after that, I think I started, maybe that's when Will Lee joined my band. And then I just asked the owner, because at the time he was pretty supportive. I was like, hey, can I do every week? And he said, yeah, sure. Also because it was a weeknight. Monday night was a dead night for them. So for him to have somebody play every Monday night at like 10:30 and bring a bunch of people and play with some, good musicians, so for him it was probably great, But I wouldn't approach a club and go like, hey, I want to play there every week. I would develop some kind of relationship before,